Hi guys! Today in this video I want to show you how I take a sketch or took a sketch that I did on location and turn it into a painting back home in my studio. So the location I was at was Blakeslee Winery out in Sherwood, Oregon, and the day that I was out there fully intending to get my paints out and paint the scene, I decided very wisely to go inside the nice, cool tasting room and sketch it out on in my little sketchbook and then paint it back home later. And it was a great decision. I didn't suffer heat stroke that day, and I got a nice little sketch to use back in my studio. That's always good, by the way, if you're painting on location, to do a quick even just a little thumbnail value study, just so you can get the lighting and the values and all of that on paper, so you have some information to work from back home in your studio. So that's what we're doing. I'm taking a little artistic license in doing this painting. Moved around and didn't imagine Mount Hood exactly, but I actually had to work a little bit from memory because it was kind of obscured with the clouds. So if you like this video, don't forget to hit the like button and also subscribe. I really appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching, and let's dive in. Take it away, Tracy. It's me. Hey everyone, so today I'm going to do a little demo on taking my a sketch that I did on location and turning it into a painting here in my studio. So I want to show you a couple photos. This one is looking out from the tasting room, or standing behind these chairs actually, and I can see Mount Hood here in the distance, barely. It's got a lot of cloud, hazy. It was a very hot day, but I still had some clouds kind of obscuring the mountains, so I'll have to use a little imagination and memory to draw in that mountain. And also I've got the vineyard that runs this way. I want to change. This is something that artistically you're allowed to do. Use artistic license. I want to change it so the rows, I can see the lines of them. So I'm going to switch it up and change that vineyard where it's growing that way. I'm going to make it grow this way. And also I'm going to kind of break up this tree line so it's not blocking you from traveling into the painting to the mountain, which is part of the great part of this winery, is that you can see Mount Hood. It's got a beautiful view looking out there. And here is where I sat doing the sketch, inside where it was air conditioning was going. I just was too hot to sit outside, and so I sat inside at the table and did my little sketch. These bushy growths here are actually Shasta daisy plants. You can see a couple are still kind of hanging in there, but I wanted to incorporate that into my painting because I think when those are in full bloom, it would be awesome. So I'm going to make sure to put those in my painting as well. And I will show you the next week after I did this sketch. I went back out to the winery and I was distracted and visiting and all kinds of stuff, but this is where I was able to do a little bit of painting on site, referring to my sketch, and also sitting out and looking at it on location. What I like about this little study is that these look nice and loose and bright and sunny. I like how my flowers looked on this side better than on this side, actually. What I don't like about this study that I did the next week is that these parts are equal. They're so equal that it bothers me. So these two are pretty close to the same size. These two are pretty close to the same size. I've got an even number, and I kind of like to stick with, you know, a little more asymmetry, I guess you could say. So I want to change that up in the painting that I'm doing in the studio. This is part of the reason that we do studies so we can kind of figure out what works and what doesn't. So I'm going to set that aside, and I'm working on this Saunders Waterford cold press knot. It is cold press, but I guess that must be like a English way of saying cold press. It's not. So sometimes you'll hear artists, when they're talking about the paper they're using, call it knot. This is a white. I was kind of hoping when I ordered this block, it's a block meaning it's all sides are glued down with a little opening here so you can remove it when you're done. I was hoping to get a brighter white, and what came to me was white, which is more of a natural. And it, when I put a mat around it, usually what I have hanging around the studio is whiter matting. Just grab one and show you what I'm talking about. You can see there's quite a bit of difference in the natural white and this bright white matte. But the only time that really bothers me is when I do just a image with the white of the paper in the background. If I'm framing an original, matting original art with just a single image, it visually it bothers me. So I was wanting to try the bright white and not the natural white, and that's just kind of an FYI. So if you're ordering the paper, you know that it's a little bit off white, and if you want bright white, you have to order bright white in the Saunders Waterford. So the first thing I'm going to do is tape off the edges. I've got this Blick artist tape, and it's about, I say a ½ inch. And I just want to run my tape all around the edges. And the reason for that is because I like a clean edge. When I am done with the painting, it's really fun and really cool to just peel back that paint, and then you'll have a nice clean finished edge. So that's what I'm going to do right now, is just tape this off. Okay, so I've got it taped off. Then what I want to do is establish my horizon line. For the most part is going to be, I think I'll start with the actual, where the vines start back here. And start with that as my line. And I'm doing really light because I don't want it to show up so much after I paint it. So I did a little bit of an angle over here. Then I'm going to come up just a touch, maybe a little bit less than that. Just a touch back here. This is going to be the field way back here. So you probably won't be able to see that very well, but I'm just kind of showing you my process. So now I'm going to go just, the mountain is bigger also. I forgot to mention that in the early part of this video. Don't like to erase too much, but I want that a little bit steeper. I'm exaggerating the size of this mountain hood because I do want it to stand out a little bit more, because I really feel like when you're up at this winery, that is spectacular to see, is that Mount Hood in the distance there. So just exaggerating it a smidge and coming down here and just kind of coming across, just so I know I have a point of reference for where I bring my sky. And then I'm going to do a couple little squiggly lines for the shadowy areas of that. I still feel like this needs to be a little bit up there. Let's do that a little bit higher. Okay, that's a little better. Move these. And it kind of comes over here a little bit. If it's not exact, it's not a big deal. So it's just going to be suggesting those. And then there's going to be shadows here. So that's pretty close to what I want it to be. Now, as far as the tree line goes, I do want a little less symmetrical look. So when I do my trees, I just kind of let my pencil kind of dance across the paper. I don't want them equally spaced apart. I want them to look more natural, like they would out. You know, they're not always going to be exactly equally distanced apart, or are they going to be the same height? So varying up the height is another way to make it look a little bit more natural. So maybe this one should come up a little bit higher, and this one can be, and just the suggestion is enough. Your brain fills it in. You don't have to draw every single detail. So there's some deciduous trees in here that I'm gonna kind of lightly pencil in, and maybe come up a little bit with the tree here, some deciduous bushes around that. I don't want these to be the same size. I want there to be a little bit of difference in the look over there. So just some squiggly lines to indicate the bushes, and let's do maybe a tree here. Happy little tree, as Bob Ross might say. And a little bit of balance. We're going to come up a little bit. These trees are actually a little bit closer as we're coming over here, so it's okay to be a little bit taller and a little bit bigger. And just a couple of little lines for some background trees. So that looks pretty good to me. It's not equal. This is a little bit shorter, and this is a little less trees over there. So then my lines for the vineyard start like this. As they come towards you, they're going to get wider. That's going to give the illusion that this is more distant. And as I come over here, the lines are going to get a little bit closer together. And these maybe are going to go off this way. So the lines, the directional lines, are going to be helpful to lead your eye into the painting. And I don't like how this is looking, so I'm going to erase, and maybe that won't even have lines. We'll just let that fade out. That sounds like a good plan to me. All right, so there we go. And up here where we're going to have the daisies, I'm just going to indicate a couple of little jaggedy flowers. And then I'm going to mask those off. So, and the purpose of masking them off is because then I can just paint right over the top of this. I don't have to try to paint around the white, and I want to leave my paper a little bit, I want to leave white where those flowers are. So again, it's just a very loosely rendered flower. And I can do a tiny, smaller ones in there. We'll see how it looks. Kind of like that. Now again, I'm trying to arrange these so they're not exactly in a line with each other, but they kind of are at an angle. It creates movement if you arrange things in a way that aren't so straight line, in such a straight line. And I said I don't want to block your way into the picture, but I think these are going to be open and airy enough that you still have a way in visually. And I also don't want to form a triangle, so I'm careful to be aware of that, because sometimes it's really easy to get triangles in the corners of your painting. So once we're done painting the background and we take the masking fluid off, that's when I'll do more detail in the flower. Yeah, let's just go with that, and then I will put some masking fluid in here on these. Okay, so let's get the masking fluid. All right, so the masking fluid that I use, this is just what I've used. There's lots of different brands out there. This is an Incredible White mask, and it is kind of a off-white, and it dries translucent. So some of them dry a little bit green. I don't know. I just kind of like it to be a little bit more translucent and creamier. So liquid frisket, I keep this in the refrigerator to keep it fresh, because frisket masking fluid does not last forever. It can get gummy, kind of like what you see here. It just gets gummy and dried up even when you have it sealed. This has been in the fridge, so imagine what it would be if it wasn't in the refrigerator. So I'll show you a couple of different ways of applying masking fluid. I do have an applicator. This has got a tip on it. It's like a little tube. It does tend to bubble when you tip it and start using it, so be aware of that. Also, don't shake it, because masking fluid gets bubbly if you shake it. You don't want to do that. I'm going to leave that off, actually. But also another way to apply, if you don't have a fine tip applicator, I just happen to have some clay shapers. These are a nice little rubbery tip. But if you don't have that, hey, you can use a skewer. If you have skewers that you've made shish kebabs out of, they have a nice tip too, those wooden skewers. So I might use this one rather than the applicator that I have. Here's another great idea. This is just an old cheapo brush that was in a set of, like a bag of brushes. This has been dipped and spread around with masking fluid. You can also use that. In fact, let's see how that works just for kicks. So, whoops, it dripped. I'm going to let that dry and then I can pick it up, but I can just kind of dab that in, which is kind of fun. You get a little random shapes. And just kind of scrub it around a little bit too. That's given me a nice thin layer, because this stuff does take a little bit of time to dry. I'm going to set that aside and go to this rubber, which you have to keep dipping into. So, but it can be spread around pretty nicely too. In fact, I like this better than the applicator tip in this case, because I don't get globs in that other one. The applicator will kind of glob and drip. Okay, I'm happy with the kind of the arrangement of those. Going to make sure to recap this and nice and tight. And this can just be rinsed off with water. Also, I want to mention before I go past this stage, I'm going to lift this little spot in a minute after it dries. If I try to do it now while it's still wet, it just kind of smears into the paper. But if you, I would recommend not going back over and trying to get more masking fluid over the top. This will just kind of smudge around and lift as well. So once you do it, let it dry. And if you're not happy with it, then peel it up and do another one. So the other thing I didn't mention is that you can use an old brush. So I have at times used a small, maybe a number 2 round brush that that's retired from painting, but I can use it for masking fluid. If I get it wet and put some soap in there, the soap in the bristles helps clean it, and you just then can dip your brush and paint it on and then let it dry. So we're going to let this dry completely and before I start the next phase, which is painting this lovely picture. So let's let this dry. Okay, so this is completely dry, and now we need to work on the sky. For the sky, let me grab a couple of paper towels. That is a necessity to dab off excess water and color if needed. So I am going to use cobalt blue. This is actually I'm using a M Graham cobalt blue just because I had it. I haven't typically used it before. It's honey based, and I just never really have experimented with their colors too much. But I didn't have any Daniel Smith cobalt blue, so, or any of the other ones. So I'm just going to go with the one I have and use it. So I've got just cobalt blue, and then I'm going to mix up a little bit of cobalt and opera rose to have ready to go. A little bit more blue in that. And I'm going to put some little touch of burnt sienna in that, just to gray it down a bit, because I'm going to use that for the shadows in the mountain. And I want to have it ready to go and ready to put in place right away, because I want a little bit of bleeding to happen with the sky into the mountain. If you look in, this isn't a very good example of it, but if you look at a mountain, you don't always see these sharp edges. Some of it just is the same value as the sky, so I'm paying attention to that. So I've got my Oval Wash by Princeton. It's a Neptune, their Neptune line, 3/4 inch. Some people call it a cat's tongue. It is a great brush for loose style painting. Holds tons of paint and water, so you have to be careful about not dripping. But I am really going to loosely lay in the sky and cut in a little bit of water up into these areas. And please forgive me if I get my head in the camera. It is so hard to not do. Try as hard as I can not to, and I always end up with my head in there. So I'm dabbing off some of that excess paint and water. And as long as this is still wet, I can cut in and work with that sky. So I also want to fade it into this area a little bit. Let's bring some of it down right away. And another thing you can do, I kind of like to have these in this sky particularly because there was some swooshy clouds. I can lift out, I just rinsed my brush off, and I can lift out some areas. Also, with a tissue, while it's still got a sheen on the paper, you can do this. After a certain point, it kind of gets past that. But I can come in here and wad this up a little bit. Got some, and just soak out a little bit, but also just lift out some lighter area for clouds. Takes a little bit of practice. Skies are not easy. I don't think. Maybe some people have an easier time of it, but I'm getting a little bit better at doing them, but like I said, it's not the simplest thing, especially if you're doing clouds like this. But I'm just gonna keep it pretty simple. I don't want to get too carried away there, so some of this is going to be covered anyway. I just grabbed another brush and tend to have too much stuff in my hands sometimes, but I saw that little spot and I wanted to dab it out. Okay, so this is a number six round, and I'm gonna get a little bit of that purple mixture and a little bit more of the mountain color and just come along here on these shadowy areas. Some of this is shadowed here. Again, I want to keep it fairly simple and leave some light areas because it is, after all, a snowy mountain. So I'm just softening some of these edges. Can dab a little bit out with my paper towel. And I have a feeling my head was in there. So, sorry about that. Oop, that's way too blue. And all I do is get my brush rinsed and come and lift that out. A little more blue into that purple mix. And then I'm just going to come down come down a little bit in here, rinsing my brush, and I can come with a damp brush, not wet, not dry, damp, and just soften along that bottom edge of that. So, you know, I'm pretty happy with that so far. As far as the mountain goes, I don't think I need to do too much because it is not the star of the show. Really, the Vineyard is. So I can come back in and just with a little bit of a thicker mixture, drop in just a couple of little areas to deepen the color. And it's still wet, so it's softening out. Rinsed my brush, coming along the bottom edge of that and softening it. And maybe try not to get carried away here. It's kind of hard sometimes. But I'm going to just darken that a little bit on that side. Dab the brush off. Dab more, and then I can lift a little bit of that. And that gives me a nice little edge there. I like that. And maybe just a touch up here. That'll give it just enough to show you what it is. Okay, so I'm going to let that sky dry and mix up. We're going to be mixing up some greens. And also there's some very distant trees here, way in the distance. So we've got a little atmospheric perspective there. Moisture in the air, making those cooler and lighter, and they get darker and warmer as they come forward. So that's what we're going to be focusing on next. Okay, so the sky's completely dry, and we're going to work on the distant trees and base of the mountain here next. I'm not sure what brush I want to use. How about I think I'll go with this round Utrecht number 10 Sablette. These are great brushes, by the way. They're inexpensive and they're really nice and soft and have nice tips to them, so I really enjoy using them. What I'm going to do is use the puddle of cobalt blue that I had for the sky, and let's see, I'm going to put a little bit of, how about I go with Hooker's Green. I want it to be blue back here, but not too bright. I want to have a nice distant feel. So the colors here have been created with cobalt blue, Hooker's Green, and a little Carbazole Violet, which is Daniel Smith. And I just kind of mix until I get the color that I feel like is about right. And I feel like that is about right. So I'm going to come along the base of this mountain, and very quickly, I might add, because I want to soften the bottom edge, and if it dries out too much, I won't be able to do that so much. So I'm just going to come all the way up on that side and then rinse my brush off and come along the bottom of that and soften. Rinse again and soften that. That way, when I come back over the top of it with the foreground trees, I'm not going to have a hard edge. And some of this I don't want to be a hard edge at the top either, so I'm just, with the tip of my brush, kind of pushing some of that up so it gives the impression that maybe there's distant trees back there. And I can just touch in a little bit more dark here and there. Very little, it's just on the tip of my brush. And I like to create watermarks intentionally, so adding some clear water to the bottom there is gonna give me the look of atmosphere too. I've got some watermarks that when it dries, you'll be able to see those. And I really like the effect of that. So I think I want to lift out just a little, dabbing the color off. I had rinsed this brush of the color, and then I can come and dab a little bit off the top there so it's not quite so solid of a line. A little bit more. The line I felt like was a little bit too even. So I wanted it to look a little bit more irregular. I could also put in a little bit of nickel azo yellow, cobalt blue, a little bit of that carbazole to just dull that down a little bit. I don't want to put too much in there, but just a little bit. Rinse my brush of a lot of the excess and just kind of touching that in, maybe a little bit more blue. That gives the illusion that there's something back there. You just can't tell what it is. But we know there's some trees growing back there behind. That gives that little impression of that going on. Then I've got some really crumbly, really crumbly raw sienna. I really need to replenish that, but I'm gonna work it. I don't need a whole lot of it. So I'm gonna just work what I can here. Maybe a little bit of raw umber as well. It's a little bit deeper, raw umber is. So I want to make sure that I don't have any of those crumblies in my brush. And I'm going to rinse and dab off excess water. So what I have here is just a much more diluted mixture. It's not real thick. I just want to put that back there. So when I come over the top, I've got some of that coming through the trees. Trees are going to be covering that, but I'm just dragging it out. So I have some open spots if I want. There will be that color back there. Do that the same back over here. And I think maybe a little, not that one. Let's lift that off of there. Hence a yellow light to brighten that up a little bit in spots. And I'm just lightly swooshing that across the paper. And again, I could do some watermarks. And you'll see when it dries what happens there. All right, so that needs to dry before we come over the top with those trees. But before it does, I'm just going to drag a little bit of that into the vineyard so those kind of get married together. so they're not so separate feeling. I just grabbed a little leaf green that I thought would be nice to just start this section here. There's no lines on that edge, so I felt like that would be a good thing to do. And then I just added some of the same green, a little bit over here. Just a very light line indicating that there may be some vineyards over there. Okay, so let's let that dry and come over the top of it with the next layer. So before we move on to the next step, which is the trees, I want to show you a little book I made last summer. And it's very helpful in getting to know your colors and what they can do. And then you also can refer back to these swatches and charts and whatnot that you put in this book. What I want to do is look at the green chart that I mixed up actually years ago and just added it to this book, because it's really helpful for me because I don't always remember exactly what a great color for evergreens, for instance, or deciduous would be. But referring back to my charts, I can get a better idea. So I'll just take you through. This is just different ways of figuring out your paint qualities and color wheel and what the different colors look like on your paper. Another color wheel, but I want to get back to the back here. And there's one, I'm going to stick my finger there and show you that in a minute. But years ago, I had so many colors that I decided to figure out what variety of greens I had. I decided to swatch it out. So I did a chart with all these greens are ones I had in my paint box, and all these reds are ones. And you know, sometimes you can get overwhelmed with color and not really know what to do with them. So I love this because I can refer to this chart and look at the greens that were mixed up and what colors it took to make those greens. So I love this olive green that was mixed with cadmium scarlet, and some of these I don't have anymore, but I love burnt orange. It's one of my favorite colors. Hooker's green and burnt orange makes a beautiful green. Sap green and burnt orange. Then you go into your reds, you get some really great sap green and permanent magenta. Look at that beautiful deep green. So that might be one I want to implement into this painting. Sap green and alizarin, that's one of my go-tos. I tend to go to that one a lot. The next page here, I did the same thing with all my greens and the yellows and oranges that I had, and that shows all the pretty sunny colors that you can get with the different yellows. I didn't get to the blues, and maybe I will someday, but I also like these mixtures here. So if you're swatching out, trying to figure out colors, don't forget to label them. That way you can refer back and go, oh yeah, that was Hooker's green and cobalt blue. And look at that beautiful, cool green that you get. Anyway, swatch book, just a binder with some plastic sleeves that load from the side. I don't like them loading from the top because they all spill out. So loading from the side is a good idea. And also you can get smaller sleeves for smaller pieces. So there you have it. Next we're gonna move on to the greens. And I'm gonna go move down to my number 8 Utrecht and go with that sap green. I like that that green that mixed up with what was it? Magenta, permanent magenta. Do I have that? I might not even have that right now. Alizarin, quinacridone magenta. I think I'll just go with the quinacridone magenta. It's a little bit brighter, but let's see what happens. Get a nice deep green, deep warm green with that. But I do want some variety, so I'm gonna get the same. I'll get sap green. And I want to mix up bigger petals in this actually. There's also another green that I like. Had to get my paints wet again. It's very warm today and everything's drying out. Serpentine. Make sure that's what that is because I want to show you. No, that's green gold, but I want that too. So green gold is a great color to just drop into a wet application on your paper. But serpentine is a Daniel Smith color that is very granulating. Is that it? Yes, serpentine green. And it starts off just looking like one color, but when it starts settling and granulating, there's these little reddish orange flecks that develop, and it's really cool. So I like that in some of this. I'm also gonna mix up, let's do a hooker's green, and I'm gonna go with a ultramarine deep to get a deeper bluer. And then I'll add a little bit of burnt orange to that to warm it up. And there, this one is a warmer dark green, this one is a cooler dark green. I think it would be nice to have a little, let's do a little cobalt teal blue. I'll add a little bit of that's pretty bright. That was Nicolezo yellow. So it's a little bit too bright. I'm going to want to tone that down a little bit, and I just put in some burnt sienna. So let's start painting with those, and then a lot of times what happens is I'll start mixing on the fly, they say. Also want a little bit of warm tones in there. So that was raw sienna, and I just dropped in a little core quinacridone gold. And that's going to probably need to be used sparingly, but I do want to maybe start with some of those lighter greens. Like this is my deciduous trees going on in here, and varying up the color as I go. You don't want to just do one straight green all the way across. You want to vary your colors up. Makes it much more believable. And let's go with the darker down below here. And I want to come in with those trees before it dries. So I'm just getting this kind of moving around with some water. I don't want those lines to be too the same. So I just want to touch in maybe a little bit more of that warmer color. It just makes it look more natural to have the different greens. So while it's still wet, has a sheen on the paper, we can just continue to drop in color. And I think I want to mix the cobalt and the teal. That'll make a nice, again, limited. That might have been too much. Okay, so then with the evergreens back there, I really want to come in while this is still wet. So I want to quickly quick as I can, grabbing from the puddles that I've just made, and real quick stroke those in so it reads as one. Let's see, let's bring this one up, as one shape. And what I do like to do as well is, let's get a little of the yellow there, Hansa yellow, and just drop that in. A little bit of water, get some of this flowing around. And I can come in over the top of that where it's more wet if the paint is thicker. If it's not thicker, it's not gonna, you're not gonna do so well with that. Just drop in a little bit more of a lighter green in there. And where this is kind of puddling up, I'm gonna soak up some of that water and soften some of it. And just kind of let it come into the foreground vineyard there. I think a little bit more of the Hansa would be nice in there. Just dropped in here and there. And you can see that spread a lot because it was pretty wet. If it would have been a little bit thicker paint mixture instead of so watery, it wouldn't have spread as far, but I kind of like that actually. So now I'm going to come right into some of that and if you can see where in places there's little white areas, I like to leave those alone so it does give light. And I'm going to leave that section alone and start moving over to this one. I've got a bigger area here, so I'm going to go to a bigger brush. I'm going to start with the number 8 and start right in with some of the deciduous trees in here, and using my whole brush, just start. And I am referring back to this picture, by the way. I'm not completely ignoring it. but I'm trying to stay loose too, so I don't want to look too long. I want to just stay loose and fluid, move right along across my paper, and then I can make adjustments. And I am holding the brush pretty close to the ferrule just because I am feeling like I need a little bit more control in these areas down here. So let's start adding in a little color. Tap it in. Then I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to my number 6 round. The one before over here was my number 4 long round. This time I'm going to come with a bigger brush, filling in some of these bigger areas. Again, leaving some light. Coming up over here. And you've got some great contrast because the mountain is white, so I'm coming all the way down across that field, and you see how it's poking through there, and we can swoosh that. Let the mountain just show through. Like it there too, just little bits and pieces that you can see. I do like that. I can always tell I'm getting a little too tight when it feels forced. Like the trees, I'm trying too hard. If I stay loose and just let my brush do the work, it comes off a lot more believable. And then I am going to come up on my brush. And like we did over here, just dropping in some water to let it spread around a little bit. This one needs to be a little bit darker. Dry my brush off a little bit and pick up some of that color or some of that water. And then I think I'll leave this section alone after I splatter in a little bit of yellow, and that'll give a nice effect after. It's still wet enough, it's drying, but where I can drag some of that color down. ever so slightly so we can start the rows of grapes. Leaf green. Not every single speck of paper should be covered. It's really nice to have the white of the paper. That really gives the illusion of light, because we don't use white in watercolor. So the white is the highlight on top of these vines. And just bring them all the way down. This is going to be darker foliage in here. And I think just for fun, it would be fun to add some little specks of as if there's in the distance some trees in these fields. Again, leaving a bit of an opening, and then we're going to let that dry. All right, completely dry. Still a little bit bubbled up, but I'm going to be working down here, so that isn't going to make a difference. But remember that little spot right there? I'm just going to peel that up so it doesn't make a weird white blob mark. And lovely, got my hand in there somehow. I got paint and should do that sometime. Do a little painting with my fist. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of go with the paint colors that I had already in my palette mixed up that I was using for this, but I want to get some of these brighter, so I'm just going to add some leaf green. I really love that Holbein color, leaf green. And I'll go with more Hansa over here, and I'll be using some of the darker greens and probably mixing on the fly for some more. So pretty bold strokes. You know, it pays to be bold. If you're spending time dabbing, it doesn't look loose and fluid and free. So if you can practice just using very loose strokes and holding your brush down a little further on the handle helps that. Also, a lot of times, let me see, grab a piece of paper, hang on. A lot of times it's hard to understand that following the form of what you're painting, how important that is. So if I am painting straight lines and I want this to look curved, it's not gonna work. So if I'm wanting a vineyard and I'm painting straight rows like this, well, if you're looking down at it, that might be fine. But I want to follow the form of what I'm painting. So I'm using my wrist to pull that through rather than doing this little dabby business. Don't want to do that. I want to do bold. And even if it comes into a dry stroke, that's really cool too. That adds some sparkle. So remember, if you're painting an object, to paint the form of it. Hope that made sense. So first I'm gonna look at the Vineyard here, and I want to come straight into my Shasta daisies, but I do want to leave some areas that are a little bit lighter and some where the sun might be hitting the tops and the hill is formed like this. So the sun isn't going to hit the sloping down parts as brightly. Those are going to be a little bit cooler or darker. So hopefully you'll see what I mean as I start. So that was a stroke of diluted paint, and I'm just following the form and letting that green hit parts of the paper, softening it down here. I want to come in with a little bit cooler greens as in the shadier parts. So adding some more color to my brush, softening this out a bit as I come down here, coming into this part. I want to get a little bit cooler green. This should kind of fade out. If it doesn't, I'll just come over the top with darker color, leaving some highlights. Coming over here maybe with some cooler greens, and I'm just lightly dragging my brush right over the top of that. And some of that I like. It's not always completely planned. I try to leave room for listening to what the paint is doing. Watercolor speaking to me, saying, this is what I want to do, let me do it. So while it's still wet, there's that opportunity to add paint. Just nice dry brush strokes. You see how that looks? Let's come down in here with some water. Just pulling from the different greens as I come in. I like that. It's kind of fun. And that was not a planned thing. But I can just play because I have those whites saved. Do the same thing over here with some darker greens. Paint right around those flowers. Come right over the top of this, straight down. Slope that got missed. Come over here with some just bold strokes. Playing around with moving my brush around in different directions. Because, as you know, a Shasta daisy or any kind of plant doesn't necessarily only grow in one direction. It's shooting off in different directions. So it'd be a fun exercise for you to just get a sheet of paper and practice making random strokes. If you have to, look at inspiration from, you know, like your garden or a gardening magazine. I like to take pictures as I go, you know, maybe I'm grocery shopping and I go to Fred Meyer and I see, always drawn to their nursery area, garden area, and just take pictures, get reference photos. Whoops, I don't think I want that one. I want to stick with the colors that I previously had rather than starting a new color. Burnt sienna, let's go with that. Cooler, little cooler blues or greens deep in the shadows. Sap green. And as this paint is getting drier and I come in with thicker strokes, it doesn't spread out as much. So you see, I can put in a thicker color and it softens, and it really is lovely how that works. It's the beauty of watercolor. That too, you can just soak it right up. I'm not so sure I liked the way that was going to look, so I'm going to soften it, bring it back down. Maybe some deeper. This is pretty thick because it's been drying on my palette, so. I think that was hooker's green, now I can't remember. And blue, ultramarine blue deep. We did the burnt orange in there, a little bit more blue, a really deep, rich color. So I'm varying up the temperature in here and the value as well. Then coming really thick, coming right over the top with a thick, soaking out the extra moisture, but I can come right over the top of some of this and put in that leaf green and stroke right over the top of it, and it just kind of pushes that darker color away. Add a couple of little strokes in that too. And then let's not forget that we can splatter. Splatter with paint, splatter with water. Find a brush that works well for that. I love this little flat Holbein brush. It does well with that. So I'm going to splatter some. Darker mixture in there too. And I want to go down to a smaller round, number 4. Let's do that with some of this lighter. Maybe a little darker on that one. Some of these stems are maybe a little too dark, or too light, I mean. This is an important part. I don't want to stop until I'm happy with the way it's looking. I've got a little burnt umber there. Actually, I want to move that around before it dries too much. I'm not done with the Vineyard yet. So I'm going to stop with this part because I do want to come down here a little bit further with the Vineyard. Okay, so I'm going to let that foreground dry, and then we'll come back and work a little bit more on it. Okay, I did a little bit when off camera, sorry about that, but I was kind of playing around with adding a little bit in here because these were just seeming too the same, even to the section here. So I'm thinking that you know, adding a little bit is going to be okay. We'll see how that goes. Okay, so now going back to a bigger brush and working with some bright colors, back to that leaf green. I want to come a little bit more of that and bring it on down into these guys, getting a little bit bluer of a green as I come down, still wanting to leave some white untouched areas. So just come right over the top and brightening up some of these sections that the sun is hitting, and bringing that right on down into my Shasta Daisy Grove, and a little bit of darker color in here, maybe to make that less important. Pop of dark right there is going to be nice against the Shasta Daisy, as well as this area. I'm leading your eye in. Bit darker. It's going to dry lighter, so I just want it to be dark enough so I don't have to go back into it. But I am liking how that's creating a really cool effect on the vineyard there. And again, I'm leaving that subtle because it's not actually the star either. I think mostly it's the Shasta daisies, and they're kind of the foreground, the forerunner here. And again, I'm continuing to play with this because it's still wet. And as long as I've got that moisture, I can do a little bit of finessing, but I sure do like how that's turned out. So I'm going to let this dry, and then we should be able to, after this is completely dry, come in and take off that masking fluid and work with completing the flowers in this painting. And that should be the finishing touches. Let's stop it right there and let this dry. Okay, this is dry. So let us do the fun thing here and start peeling up the masking. Let's use this little eraser. You can use your finger, which I will utilize my fingers at the end probably more. Well, maybe not. So peeling it up, starting with the eraser, maybe continuing with my fingers. And then after it is all peeled up, I can run my hand over it and make sure that I don't have any masking fluid that I didn't get up. I like to make sure all of it is removed. So running your finger over it can help that. And this is pretty good paper as far as masking goes. Some of the paper you might find lifts or tears when you peel it up. So you want to make sure you know what your paper is going to do before you're using masking. I know that Arches is good. Saunders Waterford is good. I'm not sure about Legion. I found that the artist tape peels the paper up with it when I've used tape. So I don't know how masking fluid would be on that. I would just assume that it would also tear the paper. So I like how that little section looks. And let's just keep on going. Okay, that is awesome. How about that? That looks pretty cool, right? So next I'm gonna do some centers for these. I cleaned off a little small space. I want to save some of my greens. So I've got it's Indian yellow. Maybe I'll use that. Winsor Newton Indian yellow. Let's put a little bit of, I don't know, that's pretty good. Vary it up a little bit with some orange on some of them. That's a cadmium orange by Holbein. I don't typically use cadmiums. This one is permanent orange. So in place of cadmiums, I always went with something more transparent because cadmiums tend to get muddied up. And so as a beginner, when I was first starting painting, I just didn't use them because I didn't want to muddy up my paintings. So let's just add a couple of places where that center might be. And I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna vary it up a little bit by adding a little bit of a different orange to some of them. Some of them bigger, some of them smaller, some of them off center, like that one. All right, so that's pretty cool. While these are drying, and hopefully I don't get my hand in it, one thing that I like to do sometimes is get a smaller brush. I've got a number 1, very small, round by Utrecht, and it's moist. I don't want it too drippy because I want a fine line. So I can just lift out some area of tree trunk. So if I just brush that in and then come over the top and dab it out with the paper towel, and then I can continue to lift if I want to. And I probably won't leave it as is. Come in with a brown or burnt orange or something like that. So let's do that with this tree and try not to get too carried away with it. Okay, that's going to need to dry for a little bit longer, so what else can we do? Burnt sienna, cobalt blue, or let's do deep, ultramarine deep. This is a good kind of grayed down brown for just some little lines like that could be trees that are just kind of lost their leaves. Not too many. Couple little sprigs up there. Just want to use the very tip of the brush for this and kind of flick rather than dab. I was doing a little too much dabbing there, but just a couple here and there makes it kind of fun. And then what I want to do, let's do a little negative painting with this brush. Maybe somewhere in this area, come in with a little bit darker, just slightly darken up that back area. A bit darker here. And also what we're going to do is get a little bit of cobalt blue, a little bit of that Opera Rose, Winsor Newton, more blue. Probably add a touch of that brown to it, but I want to just add some shadow to some of these. And come in and soften that so they're not just so stark, and just want a subtle shadow. Some of them are a little bit more in the sun, some of them are in the shadow. Don't need very much, just the tiniest touches. They don't all have to stand out super strong, but another thing that would be interesting to see, just see how a couple of white areas of, this is titanium white, that'll end up getting lighter as it dries. And you could also highlight over the top of that. Some of that I wasn't so sure I liked, but bring in a little bit of titanium white and it pops it back up. And actually adding a little bit of shadow under these just in a couple of places gives it a little life as well. And even in the shadow here where I put that titanium white, I can touch in a little bit and it's thick, it'll stand out, but the green from underneath will kind of dull that down a little so it looks like it's more in the shadow. All right, I'm pretty happy with this place that I'm at with this painting. I feel like I kind of want to add a little bit of just a real light bit of cobalt blue to push that back a little bit. Very diluted. I don't want to do too much, but just in the back there, just a little bit, maybe a little bit of a hint of a hill back in there. Just felt like it was a little bit too standing out. And then the only thing left, really, unless I sit back and look at it overnight and decide there's more I want to do, but for now, I think I want to put a little highlight in there, actually. So what you do, here's what you do. If you don't want to lift, you can get a thick mix of, actually, I think I want to do phthalo green. This is light green. A little mix of that with my leaf green and come right over the top of a couple of these, just to give it like a stem, the yellow of a stem that's hitting, the sun's hitting. And I just mixed a little bit of, oh, what was that yellow? Lemon yellow. And I'll list the supplies in the description. Paints, paper, brushes, all that good stuff. So you can refer to it if you want to. If you don't have these colors, you can improvise with what you do have. Okay, so just a highlight here and there, and then a couple of areas where I just want a couple of stems, darker stems. Let's get some more burnt orange and hooker's green. Actually, let's do this phthalo green and burnt orange for some of the stems that are in the shadows. That's a really nice dark green. And again, try not to get too carried away. It's hard. The stems are going to be coming from the center of the flower, so keeping that in mind. And I brought a couple of little sprigs up in there. I just felt like there was too much of a sameness. I think I mentioned that earlier. But if I didn't, now you know. Just a couple of little leaf indications. They just kind of go all which way. All right, so just a couple of crisscrossy lines I think will be helpful to make this more interesting. All right, I am going to call this painting done and sign my name to it after I finish stepping back and looking at it again for a time. But I hope you like this video. Again, don't forget to hit subscribe and check the description below to find out the links or the supplies that I used for this painting. But hope you have fun painting, and I hope you go try something like this for yourself. Don't be afraid to get out and paint on location. It is a great way to learn lots of different things. I mean, two-dimensional picture is great if you can't get outside or whatever, but whenever you can, go outside. And even if you pick one small little thing, even a flower or a branch of a tree or anything like that, you're going to learn a lot from painting on site. So hope that encourages you guys. Go out and paint your little hearts out, and we will see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.